The teachings of the wise, the food of God. Now this brings me to the fact that the energy retained through restraint, if one does spiritual practices, ignites in the process of God communion. To become celibate or restrained, spiritual practices such as meditation help the most, but it also works in the opposite direction. Celibacy or even restraint assists profoundly in spiritual realization. This is why the yogic and monastic paths require it. You can have a good technique and even devotion, but to contact the transcendental, you must be full of the creative power. Then that power becomes how you interact with the Creator. What I found is that the inner ground, the Ojas that you're storing up in your body, becomes like the food of God. In old movies, the villagers use torches that have some kind of substance, probably tar or resin, at the top that burns. The built-up sexual energy is that which burns as a man becomes God-illumined. It's what lets him become a light. It is what makes him a burning fire of spiritual influence. Christ's biblical parable of the three brides mentions about the one bride that uses up the oil in her lamp and was thus abandoned at the wedding night. This story makes little sense on the face, but in context of esoteric meditation is absolutely clear. The oil is the sexual fluid and energy that gets spread in a subtle way all through the body. The saints call it Ojas, the Native American shamans call it Orenda. This is what lets you interact with the divinity. The friction you then feel yourself make with the divinity, that resistance, is what creates a new being and sets you spiritually ablaze. Your retained sexual energy is what makes you an adequate match for God, your true mate. I have felt more and more that in deeper meditation, the mystic has a kind of intercourse with God that is very exhausting and difficult at times. As the Lord penetrates you further, it is even somewhat painful at times. I'm a normal heterosexual, but the man who meditates deeply senses that to the divinity he plays as if he was a female. He is the receiver, and there is a mystery inside of this that speaks to human male-female relations. After sexual lapses or relapses, I always felt that I could not bear deep meditation, that I was no longer a match for God. I felt that I no longer could provide friction for that interaction. I felt as if I was a wife who had become sexually like a wet paper bag or a gaping hole, who could no longer provide any resistance to her husband. I no longer had enough power to bring to the bargain. To engage the creative power, one must be rightful with the creative power. I could feel it so clearly. Only later, I read about a certain celibate yogic saints saying that the stored up sexual energy, the Ojas, is like the food of God. They say that the Shakti delights in it. Now, this is a post I recently found on the web. Swami Muktananda talks extensively on the value of celibacy as an adjunct to spiritual practice, how the Kundalini loves the energy of and feeds on the Ojas and Shakti, which is greatly pronounced when semen is maintained. And this certainly bears out my experiences during the meditations. I found another source on the internet. This is from an anonymous yogi. In particularly, I have found that the inner the holy pranava, is heard easily when pursuing sexual restraint. It doesn't have to be perfect celibacy, just make the effort. I don't have any scriptural citations, but I have doubts whether one can perceive the inner easily without at least being very sexually restrained. Certainly, one can't hold on to it. Without a build-up of ojas, I truly doubt whether one can handle it. It is too much. With a sanctified build-up of ojas, the soul energy within, a saint or yogi becomes able to interact with the divinity. Then a fruitful fiction can take place. A divine fire is felt more and more, burning within. Finally, that fire consumes the ego and illumines others.